the contents will be busy in audit season or individual tax filing season or the GST annual returns, everything. So, but at the same time, we should keep in our mind that coming week, 3rd and 4th, so we do have elections of central council and regional councils. So it's each and every eligible members privilege and right to vote. So please do come and exercise your franchisee, and please do support for the chartered accountants for the benefit of chartered accountants, 3rd and 4th, and it will be there in all the 6 booths we have arranged in Bangalore. So please do come and vote, exercise your vote. And the next biggest program in the month of December 10th and 11th. So it is National Conference on GST. So chief guest is President of ICAI, will be addressing the members. So it's an opportunity to meet and greet the president at Bangalore. So I request all the members to please kindly register and please do attend the seminar and support our Bangalore branch and enrich your knowledge on GST as well. So then the next technical session is on critical issues and landmark judicial pronouncements relating to charitable institutions. For this, we have renowned speaker, CA Prasant sir. So I request Chairman BT Sethi sir to please welcome Prasant sir and invite him with floral bouquet. Welcome, sir. To give a brief introduction about Prasant sir, he's a fellow member of ICAI and is practicing in Bangalore. He's a commerce graduate and pursued chartered accountancy course and qualified in November 2006. He's practicing in the field of direct taxes and is mainly involved in search and survey matters, corporate taxation, transfer pricing, international taxation, and handling litigation and representation matters at various levels. He has presented more than 100 papers on direct taxes in various seminars, conferences, and other professional platforms. He has previously served as a co-opted member of Committee on International Taxation constituted by SIRC and also a faculty at Bangalore branch. He is also a faculty at Fiscal Policy Institute, Government of Karnataka. He is a member of Finance Advisory Committee of Karnataka State Cricket Association and also a member of Central Taxes Committee of FKCCI. He is a life member of Bangalore ITAT Bar Association and is presently Joint Secretary. With this brief introduction, I once again welcome Prasant sir for today's session, and over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, all. At the outset, I thank the Bangalore branch for having given me this opportunity to share my views on critical issues and landmark judicial pronouncements relating to charitable institutions. Before we begin, we are indebted to parents for life. We are indebted to our guru for the way we live. I take this opportunity to place on record my deep sense of respect and gratitude to my mentor, C.A.S. Venkatramani, who's been a guiding force and factor in my endeavor of profession. Also, my respects to C.A.D. Devraj and C.A.A. Shankar, who have mentored me at various stages of my professional career, which has enabled me to present myself before this august gathering. To set the tone down, the topic is critical issues, along with it being landmark judicial pronouncements. But one disclaimer is that I'm sure, as usual, Bangalore branch would have served a hearty lunch, probably heavy lunch, good lunch. So I would not make the effort of waking somebody up from the sleep if they so desire to take a nap. But I would try my best not to put you to sleep. And for the morning session, I had logged on and I was listening to Dr. Suresh talking on the subject. And anyway, he's the authority on the trusts and other related institutions. Nevertheless, I've attempted to bring out certain issues that you might not have covered or which are probably in my domain. So we would start off with that. Look at 2 subsection 15, which defines charitable purpose. I'm sure the introduction is over in the first session and the topics have been brought out. Okay. 2 subsection 15 defines charitable purpose in an inclusive manner. Why is this definition important and what are we going to discuss in the next 90 minutes or so is that each of these terms from charitable purpose, the entire definition and the issues that arise out of the interpretation of those issues and various judgments which have encompassed on various topics to arrive at what we can probably say the final nuances of how charitable institutions are run and what are the intricate issues involved in the assessment of charitable institutions as well. Charitable purpose includes relief of the poor, education, yoga, medical relief. These 4 are very important on one aspect. Yoga came in much later. Preservation of environment, including watersheds, forests and wildlife, and preservation of monuments or places or objects of artistic or historic interest. This is one limb of it. And the advancement of any other object of general public utility. These words are very critical whenever we are discussing about charitable institutions, because most institutions, maybe a trust registered under the Trust Act or a Section 8 company or a erstwhile 1956 Act Section 25 company, though you say that your objects are charitable, you have to fit into either of the conditions of being relief to the poor, education, yoga, medical relief, because yoga, preservation of environment, other things came in much later. Earlier you had only relief of the poor, education, medical relief and advancement of any other object of general public utility. Though probably 30 years ago you had the word activity not amounting to profit, but subsequently it was changed to advancement of any other object of general public utility. What happened? A lot of charitable institutions tried to misuse the provisions which were given to them, or rather the trust that the legislature had placed upon the charitable institutions that somebody who is genuinely wanting to do good should not be brought on the ambit of taxation. So they were given certain exemptions, Section 11 and 12, registration and so on and so forth. But once they started misusing, the government in its wisdom took up the issue and brought about a proviso to say that if your object is in the advancement of any other object of general public utility, which means dehors the first mandatory conditions. If you are relief of the poor, education, yoga and medical relief and other things, you are on one limb. If you are on advancement of any other object, you are on different limb. It will not be a charitable purpose if it involves carrying out nature of trade, commerce or business. Again, they had to bring in conditions there. You had a limit of 25 lakhs earlier, which was subsequently amended to say the aggregate receipts from the activity of business should not exceed 20% of the total receipts. Else, you will lose the character of it being charitable in nature. It's brought about, the original proviso was brought about in 2008 Finance Act. And I'm sure in the morning session, this particular point was stressed upon, so I will not deal with this particular amendment and the intention behind it. Because as we all know, when you have to interpret something, intention of legislation is very important, and more so the speech of the finance minister when he moved the bill, which would help us understand the intent behind such an introduction. This is very clear here, and this was explained in the morning session, so I would not get there. We will straight away come to what happens to the importance of the amendment and how it will impact certain cases. Proviso to 2 subsection 15 impacting Karnataka Industrial Areas Development Board, what is known as KIDB. What is the issue, moot issue here? Whether on facts it could be said the assessee was engaged in charitable activity, though on advancement of general public utility, and therefore 215 was not applicable. So what we have to understand here is, just because an activity is falling under advancement of any other object of general public utility does not by itself make the activity not charitable. If ultimately the dominant and prime objective is to be a charitable institution, and if the activities carried on are charitable in nature, just because it is incorporated through a particular mode, or in this case, a statutory body under the Karnataka Industrial Development Area Act 1987. The reason of its introduction was to promote and assist in rapid and orderly establishment, growth and development of industries in suitable areas of state, which means relief of the poor, medical relief, education is on one limb. But here it is public at large, you're going to get benefited by such institutions. But as usual, the department woke up and said, look, you are not falling within the ambit of the definition. You are coming into the proviso. Your activity is amounting to trade, commerce or business, because they will have lands, they will be selling lands, giving lands on lease for industrial purposes. But ultimately, Karnataka High Court held that the proviso will not be applicable, because in any case, the dominant objective and the intention of the party in doing this must be looked into. At the same time, the revenue has preferred an appeal to the Supreme Court on this, and the SLP has been granted, which means Supreme Court has admitted SLP against this order, and the matter is pending disposal at Supreme Court level. But as we speak, and as the law that stands now, more so in the state of Karnataka, based on the jurisdictional high court judgment, entities which are incorporated for public good, and if the objects are clear, you will be able to claim the benefit of it being a charitable institution, and consequential reliefs under 11, 12 and the relevant provisions of 13 and the assessment, all those things will continue. What happens is, it's a statutory body and established under Karnataka Industrial Area Development Act 1987. It's a separate statutory body. It is not government. It is everything else. Government is there. Probably we can recall the words of Pramod Mahajan when he spoke in the parliament to say, is inside the government, outside the front, supporting the government, but still being in opposition like that. It is completely under the control of government, but it's a statutory body under a separate enactment. So therefore, it is not government, because if it's government, it's a different ballgame altogether. If it's central government or state government, there's no question of you getting taxed on it at all. It will be assessed as AOP trust. AOP trust.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir.
It is possible that they might have taken association registration as AOP also, but in assessment, it will be AOP trust. They might not have been given a PAN with the fourth alphabet being T. I do not know the PAN of KIDB, but it's either AOP trust or AOP, but during assessment, assessed as charitable institution.
Along with the KIDB
BD also
has a similar problem.
We'll come to that.
Okay.
BDA is also covered.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank
come
you.
to that. We'll come to BDA. Because on lines of KIDB, you have ITPO, India Trade Promotion Organization. Delhi High Court has also held that the dominant and prime objective of institution was not the desire to earn profits, but of object of promoting trade and commerce, not for itself, but for the nation. It was clearly a charitable purpose. We also probably will look into Bharat Diamond Bourse Supreme Court judgment. It is there in the presentation. Because the topic has come up, I will take it up. Again, Bharat Diamond Bourse Supreme Court judgment is a situation wherein the traders had come together to form an association for promotion of diamond trade and to get better prices. Though on one of the aspects of advancement of money to a founder, the matter was held against the assessee, but in so far as the charitable nature was there, it is affirmed even at the High Court level, and Supreme Court has also not disturbed that. So this type of example here, Lucknow Development Authority, Jodhpur Development Authority, all these things fall under the same ambit as your BDA. And these cases are going on in tribunal and reaching the High Court in a routine manner, I would say. Because it's probably one arm of the government fighting with another as to which pocket the money must ultimately go to, whether it's the right pocket or the left pocket, they're fighting. It's ultimately going to the government because they don't pay taxes. Because then the question of there's no devolution of taxes to the state by the quantum of taxes they pay. Once they're not paying taxes, it doesn't really matter as to how they're wanting to be assessed. Another important aspect to look into is the object of charity should not be a inferred one, or it not be indirect. It must be on a direct count of you performing that activity, resulting in it being considered as a charitable institution. It must be relief of the poor, education, medical, whatever. In any condition, it should be a direct benefit which must be, or probably you should have the nexus. You must be able to find out the nexus between the activity that you're conducting and the benefit that the ultimate beneficiaries of the public at large are receiving. If you're saying it's an indirect benefit, I'm afraid you will not get the benefit of the tag of a charitable institution, and consequently the relief available under 11 and 12 will not be available. And generally, what is the position? When are you supposed to prove, or how are you supposed to establish to the authority that you are charitable in nature? At what stage? How do you quantify and bring it on record that you will really look into the transaction of the SSE and bring it on record, or will you wait for the activity to commence, continue, and then look into it? Probably when we look at registration of 12A, which I'm sure has been dealt in the morning session, couple of points that I would like to add at this point itself is, it is settled position of law that at the time of registration, the authorities, that is the DIT exemption or the Commission of Income Tax, as the case may be, cannot traverse beyond the trust deed or the document which is the basis for him to grant the registration. Because if it's a newly formed trust, the commissioner cannot say, I will wait for you to complete the activities and then decide. He has to first, based on the document. And what is the basis of the document? Now we get back. It is the dominant intention, which means the commissioner is acting on your dominant intention to carry out charitable activities, thereby based on your trust deed permitting you to be registered as a charitable institution, with of course the condition saying that if you when the conditions are violated, you tend to lose the registration. But at the time of registration, he cannot look beyond the basic structure of the basic documents that the section envisages. When you're filing the form 17A, or as the case may, whichever number it's changed to now, based on those documents and the averments in the deed, the registration has to be granted, and they cannot look into the. It's so possible that the trust has commenced activities for 2 or 3 years, is going on, and then in the 4th year it may want to apply for registration, because maybe in the first 3 years it never really had any income, which in any case, even on commercial principles, it could not be brought to tax. Assuming it had always expenditure of excess or expenditure or income, it would not have really changed its character. It remains a trust, albeit without registration under 12A. So the exemption of 11 for the income aspect is not available, but the characteristic of it being a trust will not cease. It remains a trust. Only dividing factor would be that it is not an entity which the income tax department considers it as a public charitable trust so as to warrant exemption from the provisions of the Income Tax Act. Be that as it may, how do we understand the general public utility and the dominant intention, and which were those cases which really held their fort onto that? One of the oldest cases and the landmark judgments in trust is that any speaker who speaks on charitable institutions has to probably talk on Surat Art Silk Cloth Manufacturing Association 121 ITR 1. the definition of charitable purpose was brought out here by the Supreme Court. They're only trying to bring out the gist here. But again, the important aspect that we have to consider here is the object of general public utility should mean we have to decipher this term in such a way that it should not be an activity involving or attributable to a profit-making exercise. The predominant activity should be anything but profit motive. But at the same time, it's not that you will not make profit at all. Because even in this judgment, though delivered by majority of Justice Bhagwati and others, Justice Sen had a dissenting judgment to say that you cannot have any activity remotely connected to profit at all. That's a dissenting judgment, but by majority they held that you can have a profit motive. But if you look at the dissenting judgment, he says, profit to feed the charity is also not good. You cannot say that you want to make profit so as to do charity. Justice Sen's argument was that it had to be looked at in strict sense that you should never be making profit at all. But the majority of the judges have come to a conclusion that, look, as long as the ultimate object is charitable in nature and the money is being flowed back into the system for charitable activities, just because there is an activity incidental to the main objects in generating certain additional funds or surplus, which will be used for carrying out the activities of the trust or institution, cannot be held to be in violative of the charter itself, and therefore they said that it should be assessed as a charitable institution. Because the primary objective cannot move the dominant objective. Rather, the ancillary objective cannot move the dominant objective. Which is why in the recent amendment in 2016, they brought about a 20% threshold. When the 25 lakh threshold was there, take a situation of a very big trust having about, say, 1,000 crores of asset. Maybe they have an ancillary activity of sale of old newspapers or old books or something, which might have fetched them, say, 30 lakhs. That does not mean that the 1,000 crore corpus they've generated and the donations received would amount to, say, a profit-making activity. Therefore, then they realized 25 lakh threshold may not work across larger trusts, because you will have activities which may be treated as in the ordinary course of business as on commercial principles to be held to be business. They brought about a 20% threshold. Why 20%? Under the income tax act, at various places you have various percentages stipulated for. Say in transfer pricing, you will have one particular threshold. In certain classes of transfer pricing, you will have 90% if your purchase and sales is governed by one person, you will become associate enterprise. In 13.3, you will have 20%. In 222E, for deemed dividend, you have certain threshold. So, at every stage in the act, there are different thresholds fixed for saying. Similarly, they fixed here 20% to be a condition saying, look, you're doing charitable activities, yes. You also have some activity which is generating profit, yes. But as I said, the tail cannot wag the dog. So the activity generating the receipts cannot be more than 20%. Up to 20%, they say, yes, you have to receive the money to flow back into the system to conduct the charitable activities. But the moment that 20% exceeds, other issues may arise, whether they will lose the complete character of trust itself, whether the entire income will be lost, or is it only that activity which has to be brought out and brought to tax, whether it amounts to suo motu or automatic cancellation of registration. And another probably topic which we can link here and talk is what happens in cases of the additional profit being generated. It does not mean the registration is suo motu cancelled, because it has to be by a procedure known to law. The commission is supposed to issue a show cause notice, bring it on record, and then once your reply is examined, only then they can proceed to pass an order. And department has also given out a circular saying that the field authorities cannot proactively go out and start deregistration or cancelling registration of trust, saying that the proviso is attracted and your receipts are exceeding. They have to follow a procedure known to law. Otherwise, it would have been a chaotic situation wherein before even the assessment was completed, probably trust would have lost the status of the charitable institutions. One important aspect in this case is, though I would not say this is on not a landmark judgment compared to Surat, Art and Silk, or whatever, but the important facet here is, for a particular, if you're doing something for a particular community, are you entitled for the tag of being charitable in nature, or it should be, or should it be a public at large, beneficiary is unknown, or is it sufficient if it is a known particular community? And in that community, the people at large, not intended at any specific beneficiaries, but a particular community. This particular case of Allahabad High Court was, Surjit Devi Kunjilal was dealing with the upliftment of the Vaishya community, saying that under the main objects, they had listed out, the main intention was to help people in the Vaishya community for various aspects of education, being again medical relief, etc. And with the underlying condition that in so far as natural calamities, floods and those things are concerned, they will help out everybody. It's not that they restricted their monetary help to one section. They also said, in terms of natural calamities, we stand with all. But otherwise, we are predominantly wanting to uplift our community by helping them at various stages, including extending financial aid for marriage of poor people in their community, because they felt that it's a religious thing, and that as practicing Hindus, it is a very pious thing for the marriage to be conducted. Ultimately, the High Court upheld that contention, saying that once you say it's charitable nature, it need not necessarily be to the poorest of the poor only. It can be to the poor in a particular community that you have identified, as long as it is not intended towards certain specific beneficiaries. So identifying Mr. A, B, C, D, E, F in a particular community and say these are the persons to whom the benefit will go, you lose the tag of it being charitable. But as long as it is to a particular community, but nevertheless not identifiable part there, it may pass through. But this is again old case laws. In the present day world, you do not know with how the citizen activism picking up, you do not know how probably the matters will be looked at now, as to which is the lens that the judiciary will use now to decode these type of institutions. No, we do not know. Not that we are making any aspirations on the judiciary, but we do not know as to know which way the tide would swing in the present day if these type of issues were to reach. This one another very important judgment is Sole Trustee Lok Shikshana Trust versus CIT. This was originally State of Mysore. Before it became State of Karnataka Trust, Commissioner of Income Tax is a State of Mysore. Matter traveled to the Supreme Court. What is the activity of education here? Here the moot point was, they were running a Kannada newspaper and they wanted to give out lot of information pertaining to Kannada language and lot of information and other, I would not say guidance, but to the benefit of a particular community, and but by way of publishing of newspaper and a weekly. But ultimately, they said that what is charity does not mean you have to have profit in that, but if the activity is completely profitable in nature, then you will not be able to have the tag of education here coming in, because just because by virtue of your newspapers, people may be able to read or understand or gain knowledge, it will not be treated as education. Education must be in a straightforward way. You can probably read out the observations which are very important actually, which in understanding. It's probably it will come in the subsequent slide. I'll take you through there, wherein the Supreme Court has dwelled on how we have to interpret education, because it is not life lessons, because you may learn certain lessons from different people in your lifetime through different activities, but that does not mean it is activity of education. We look in the subsequent slide when we reach there on the Sole Shikshana Trust itself. It's a very important observation to deviate as to systematic education versus getting the education itself. It's like getting schooled through a mechanism wherein you go to primary school, high school, complete your then complete your graduation, vis-a-vis getting homeschooled or home tutored. We'll come back to this slide now. Look at this. Only systematic schooling or training is covered. The education has not been used in a very wide and extended sense, wherein every acquisition of knowledge, though it may constitute education, does not mean the process of training which one can get by himself by reading a newspaper. The publisher of newspaper cannot say he is into education and claim the benefit. This is an old case, but how it traversed was that, if you look at the observation of Supreme Court here, what they've said, if you are not careful, your wallet is liable to be stolen and you're liable to be cheated by some unscrupulous person. The thief who removes our wallet and the swindler who cheats you teach you a lesson and in the process make you wiser through poorer. If you visit a nightclub, you get acquainted with and add to your knowledge about some of the not much revealed realities and mysteries of life. All this in a way is education in the greatest school of life, but this is not the sense in which the word education is used in 215, which means Supreme Court is very clear in saying that just because you acquire certain particular knowledge which you did not possess earlier does not mean it is education. It must be a systematic schooling or training procedure which ultimately can be known as in the furtherance of education and not any knowledge you gain as a byproduct of either you being intelligent or probably exhibiting a foolish behavior. Based on that, you will not be able to claim the benefit. Coming to the first definition, though I skipped one slide, coming back to this now. Scope of the words relief and poor. The term used in the section is relief of the poor. Whether the word poor can mean only those who are below the official poverty line or does it include all those who are economically weaker but not necessarily below the poverty line. See, this is the now argument going on even in the highest court to say in terms of reservation, who are that creamy layer who must get, probably who should not get the reservation among the deserving classes. Even in the reservation, they're wanting to make a class wherein the so-called creamy layer, which now the center, at least till now, has a limit of 8 lakhs per annum being the annual income. Center said anybody getting less than that wanted to be in the reservation. More than that was supposed to be a creamy layer. Similarly, whether somebody is below the official poverty line, it's fine. Maybe they may say 30 rupees per day, 40 rupees per day, 50 rupees per day, but generally they may they may not be falling within the BPL standards set by the center, but economically they may be backward. Whether those things will include relief of the poor. Ultimately, it is not mandatory that the word poor confines itself to those below the poverty line. It ultimately results to being something, if you are doing something free of cost and if the beneficiary is public at large, identifiable lot and not probably a preset or predefined set of people, you will be able to say that your activity is amounting to relief of the poor. It may also constitute your rehabilitation by the PDA, wherein they rehabilitate slum dwellers and give them habitation, give them lands and construct houses and give it to them. Whether that activity is charitable or not, can you say that it is done with a profit motive? They might have purchased the sites through people. Maybe the government has bought back the sites and then done a rehabilitation for poor. But it is done by one of its arm, like the BDA. Like how we discussed KIDB, BDA might be responsible for certain activities. Once those activities are conducted, it ultimately is getting to the root of the matter, which is relief of the poor, and therefore they are entitled to be benefited. If you look at a very old judgment, 12 ITR 482, Privy Council, All India Spinners Association, the observation, I only wanted to take you to the observation. If an association is set on foot by a political organization and is connected with it, but still has for its real object the relief of poverty, its connection with the political organization will not make its real object any less charitable. I would not take out names here, but in the present arena, we'll be able to relate to lot of organizations like this, wherein set by political organization, but conducting activities which are charitable in nature on their own, or in the reverse, you being a charitable institution or organization, also have your extended arm as a political party, and the political party would continue its regular political activities, but you as the establishment of that old, whichever way, trust or organization, institution, continue to dole out charitable activities. The fact that you're associated with a political party or you have political affiliations there would not make the activity itself just charitable. This was 12 ITR, which means yes. Yes. Yes, to explain the question for the benefit of people who are having virtually, because they may not be able to hear your question. The question is, in a organization where they have say UGC grants or whatever and running courses by the day with the approval and certain evening coaching classes or regular evening college which is being run, though with the permission of UGC, but the college is collecting fees from the students, whether that collection of fees amounts to not being charitable. In my opinion, collection of fees would not make the activity as profitable or commercial activity. Ultimately, the overall objective of that particular institution, or if you look at the trust as such, is education. But mere collection of fees from certain people would not make it less charitable, because ultimately what is being used as collected from fees is for infrastructure of the college or the institution or organization and giving better facilities to the students. Therefore, collection of fees would not make the institution less charitable. Capitation fee, will come to it later, but collection of fees would not impact the activity of not being charitable. It will continue to be charitable. Capitation fee, which is, we will discuss TMA by Supreme Court judgment a little later. Coaching institutes, I will take institute's own example. Okay, we will come here. It's there in the next slide. I would, I'll cover, just remind me when we reach there. Coaching institutes are covered. Yes, sir, you had continuation question. So ultimately, the quantum of fees paid will not determine the nature. The dominant intention would remain that they are a registered association or college or university, as the case may be, who are permitted under law to collect what is known as tuition fees. Only for certain sects of the society, government would reimburse. For example, if you take the Right to Free Education Act for the children from standard 1 to standard 10, the schools are supposed to admit children with very minimal or probably zero fees. Government reimburses a portion of the fees to the schools in a predetermined formula, which means government may fix 30,000 per child as the fees. The school may be collecting 75,000 as fees, but that doesn't mean the school is supposed to collect only 30,000 and the rest 45,000 is commercial. The school has fixed at 75,000. Government said, I have enacted a statute by which you are supposed to do public good, and you will get only 30,000 for this as reimbursement from the government. If the activity is completely only education institution, either they'll get registration under 12 and get relief under 11, or under 1023 C3A, B3A, B3AD, which now what is combined is 5 crores. Earlier you had each institution at 1023 C3AD could be 1 crore. Lot of education institutions were falling into that particular small ambit and were able to come out of the ambit. Yes, not avoid. I would not say avoid taxes, because they are not by nature taxable. It comes under chapter 3. So they enjoyed the benefits and privileges that government has given to them, so that education becomes a very important facet of the developing the future generations. The education itself is charity. The fact that if you look at charitable purpose includes relief of the poor and education. So as long as your educational institution and conducting within the realms of say if you registered at 12A and you follow these conditions, or under 1023C for university, or whichever the clauses under 1023C, assuming you don't fall within the long list of provisos to 1023C. I think the last count we had some 19 or 20 provisos. If you don't fall into any of those things, and if you're able to get the exemption, the fact that you are into education itself will give you the relief. And it depends on how you registered. If you registered as a private limited company, and so for example, take this latest online thing as Byju's, I'm sure it would be a private limited company because it's raised money. It is private limited company. It is raising money. It is collect. So the object, he may be in the business of imparting education, but it is not. He is not saying he's not there to make profits, because ultimately it's a private limited company which is running on valuation. It's a valuation game. He is making profits. He's paying the taxes as applicable to a commercial entity. As again, say for example, if you take one Srinivasa Education and Charitable Trust, one of the matters which I've had, it runs a medical college. You have other education institutions coming within it. Say take one Adi University or Bangalore University, because again it's government. You take any private university assets, say Vellore Institute of Technology, which is a deemed to be university. If they qualify the conditions of that particular university act, and they've given that recognition under the local state legislature of it being university, and their activities are amounting to education only, they will not pay any taxes, because they will compute and say that it's a association of persons trust and claim exemption depending on 11, 12 or 1023C as the case may be. If they want to come out of it and claim be a activity into commercial transactions and profitable, nobody is stopping them. So education itself would give you the benefit, which is why you see a lot of people venturing into education. But how the high fees will have to be countered, because they have a committee. I can say this because I'm one of the universities. I'm on the fee fixation committee. You can say because the government has given the mandate as to how the fees has to be fixed. This stems from coaching classes will come. Capitation fee and profiteering. If you look at this, Supreme Court came down heavily in the case of TMA Pi Foundation. It was a 9 or 11 judge judgment which came in to say that the capitation fee cannot be collected, which is why if you look at a lot of rates which have happened on the institutions, why they tend to lose the exemption categories, because they would have not followed the the benefit conferred upon them in spirit, and law to say that they would have collected the capitation fees. As long as you're collecting only the fees which is permissible, there are two types of it. One, you fix 1 lakh as a government fixed. For example, any engineering seat or medical seat, government would fix, you can say collect 1 lakh. Yes, the government also gives something called 15% or 20% of management quota. Why? If everybody pays only 1 lakh and you want a 1 crore building, you can't construct it. So therefore, they give something as management quota, wherein the management has a discretion to collect additional fees for that to put into the infrastructure. It's not for the benefit of trustees. If it is established that that money has gone to the persons enumerated under subsection 3 of section 13, automatically results in violation of the conditions, and it loses the character of it being charitable in nature. As long as the money collected is flowed back into the institution of income or corpus donation or through fees, it will continue to be education. Because even in Supreme Court has said here, a rational fee structure should be adopted by the management, which should not be entitled to charge a capitation fees. Appropriate machinery can be devised by the state or university to ensure that no capitation fee is charged and that there is no profiteering, though a reasonable surplus for the furtherance of education is permissible. Which means everybody understands that in this commercial day world, without making a reasonable surplus, you will not be able to give it back to society or flow back the money into the system. Therefore, a reasonable surplus is permissible, which is why when the, if you look at the next case, what I brought about, recent one, Karnataka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, lot of documents were seized during the search, and the treasurer and the secretary admitted that yes, they had received the capitation fees. Registration at 12A was denied immediately because the dominant intention of that particular Chamber of Commerce was to, for the furtherance of trade and commerce and for the benefit of people, and not to have an education institution collect capitation fees. The moment it was accepted by them, the registration was denied. So therefore, collection of fees is not a deterrent to it not being charitable, but what is not permissible, if the money is collected, it loses the character of it being charitable. Income from coaching classes, classic example, ICAI versus DIT, Delhi High Court, 347 ITR, page 99. Again, I stress on this word, it may sound very boring and repetitive. It's the dominant intention or the dominant function, which is playing a very crucial role in determining whether a particular activity amounts to charity or not. The Delhi High Court said the dominant function of the institute was to exercise overall control and regulate activities of the members and students, and for providing of training and examination, awarding of degrees. There is a clear distinction between coaching classes conducted by private coaching institutions and the courses and examinations which were held by the institute. Therefore, though the institute collects coaching fees, examination fees, and maybe highly, I would say, good, not even reasonable, more than reasonable surplus in the books, our SIRC member also will agree that the institute has got enough and more surplus. Babu sir is going to second me on that. Yes. So, Mr. Gupta, you also are in the line of fire. Everybody. So, as long as there is considerable surplus, what is the dominant intention here? It's not to make profit. It is to serve the society at large. What is society at large here? In this, the subsect is chartered accountants and chartered accountant students. That is a subsect, you can say. Therefore, the institute is running these coaching classes, collect the fees, and they also provide the infrastructure. You cannot say that institute is into coaching activities as opposed to a private coaching like this Unacademy or Byju's, or as the case may be. Names may be many, but ultimately their motive is profit, as against the motive of the institute, which is not to make. Yes, madam. Profit, not for profit is one side. The degree, there is a power conferred the institute has got, because it's under an act of the parliament, institute is functioning. Institute has been given that power to grant that particular degree. Yes, it's a course recognized. But the activity is not whether there is a degree or not. Ultimately, whether the activity of you conducting coaching classes by the institute, ultimately the student may not take the exam at all. Then what happens? Though if he passes the examination, there is a degree for him. If it doesn't pass, but there is plausibly a distinction to be made out, saying just because a degree can be given does not make the institute as not for profit. In the same sense, the intention behind, just because, and there may be a private college who is giving courses, and the Bangalore University may recognize a private institution's coaching and ultimately conduct examination. That does not take away the character of that particular institute if it's running for profit. It can also be a situation where it is, say, probably XYZ organization helping poor students with preparation for IAS, KS and other examinations. They conduct regular coaching classes. They do not award any degrees. They collect fees. There are two types of it. If they are registered and claiming this benefit is on one side. If they are private coaching classes collecting fees and imparting that education, it is still profitable motive for them. So there will be a distinction between the award of a degree being the primary motive. Award of the degree cannot be the primary motive to determine the charitable nature of the institute. A private coaching institute differs from the CA institute because of the dominant intention of the institute is not to make profit, whereas for a private organization, if you are in business, the very definition of business is that you are supposed to make activity for profit, because no man would trade with himself, or no man would deliberately trade to make a loss. That is against the ethos of the business definition itself. If somebody is into business, the objective should be for profit only. He cannot say, I am into business for loss. Though income includes loss, somebody cannot say, I am venturing into a certain transaction only to make a loss. Therefore, that is a distinction that could be made out. It is still taxable. Yes, Kerala Samajam, in my opinion, will be exempt because they will be collecting nominal fees.
Yeah.
They will be running under an organization.
Baiju,
Exactly. It is
Yeah,
not the
dominant-
quantum of the fees.
your dominant intention comes there.
Exactly.
Whereas Baiju is conducting, it will not be, your dominant intention is profit.
Profit. Exactly. So, in fact, say for example, Byju's may charge 99,000 as against your Kerala Samajam charging 1 lakh.
Right.
But still, the objective of Kerala Samajam charging 1 lakh is not to make profit. Ultimately, he'll have excess of income or expenditure. He will probably get a better faculty who may be charging, or he may have a new building with different infrastructure. He may probably give some laptops to students or create a good library, which probably the other private players may not do. Again, so
Sir, I want a long question. It's a
Yes.
question. Right now, it's fine.
yes.
In the longer run, how do you make a distinction between what is charitable, what is education, and what is profit-based education? I do not know whether anything we can think of, because it is happening all over.
Correct.
Today, how do
Ultimately-
you make a distinction?
Ultimately, if it's a private limited company, whose, if you look at their memorandum, they would say they are into the activities being 1, 2, 3. So, in their if it is charitable, he has to apply for a Section 8 registration, not a regular registration. So, there itself, the intention first is clear.
Okay.
If you want a company form of organization, and if your objective is to do charity, you will open a Section 8 company now.
Okay. That's right. Thank you.
And follow the conditions there, because there you cannot give any remuneration. You cannot part with the money to the shareholders, because there can be shareholders even in Section 8 company, but they cannot take any dividend or remuneration there. That is the distinction that we have to make. No, nobody is stopping anybody from applying. Anybody can apply, provided you fit into the realm of the form of organization. If you form a trust or a association, and if a dominant objective is not to make profit, say 10 people come together, put in the initial money, run a coaching center, impart free coaching to students. At the end of it, if you remain with 1,000 rupees surplus, they are not going to tax you. Ultimately, you will say that it is excess of income and expenditure, and you have to say that it is, again, this, you also look at how the principle of mutuality works. If it is a closed group of organization, between the members, there is no profit or there is no loss, because the classic example we can give is Sir Kikabai Premchand versus CAT 24 ITR 506, wherein the Supreme Court said a man cannot trade with himself. Similarly, if it's a members coming together for a joint objective by the members, for the members, to the members, the principle of mutuality kicks in, and where there is mutuality, there is no taxation. For example, Bangalore Club, on the issue of deposits from banks, it is taxable, because Supreme Court has finally held that it is not, mutuality does not exist between, though a bank is a member of the club, they have said the moment money is deposited, it becomes a debtor and creditor relationship, and you lose the mutuality there. But for all other receipts of, say, Bangalore Club, KCA, Boring Institute, as long as it is between the members, the principle of mutuality runs. There is no tax to be paid on the receipts because it's ultimately excess of income or expenditure, which will float back into the system for benefit to the members only. They will not pay any. The income is exempt on the principles of mutuality there between members. Similarly, if there's an organization who's giving, the objective is not to make profit, and you're able to establish that, take the registration. Nobody is stopping. Every street can have a charitable institution imparting education either free of cost or at a nominal price. It would not impact. No.
Income tax. Your
Yes.
mutuality concept will come only
Income
where,
tax.
whereas under GST,
Yes.
they have thrown it
They-
out.
With retrospective effect, they have brought about to say that
Yeah.
all these institutions, clubs are supposed to,
Even to the members. This
members,
is right.
yes, they're supposed to collect and
Yeah.
discharge the liability, and it's a central legislation, now it's binding.
So it is still standing. There are not.
It still stands.
Okay. Okay.
It still stands, and tomorrow Jatin is going to explain in detail on that controversy.
Okay. Okay.
That limits are there, 7,500 per month. The moment you exceed that, you will start collecting GST. The fact that for mutuality related associations, there's a retrospective amendment in the GST law saying it went back to the first day itself. To say that from that day itself it was applicable. You will hear about those controversies tomorrow when Mr. Jatin discusses that.
Pay a pittance as rent.
Correct.
They have constructed new property and they have rented it out to subs and other commercial establishments, and they are correcting market rent. What will be the character of?
See,
the-
you have to look into their charter, and if it is again for the benefit of those members only, everybody cannot become a member there. That's how all the clubs are. Otherwise, the clubs cannot function at all. Most of the which are functioning, the moment you say it is taxable like any other restaurant outside, they will not be able to provide you with the rates that they provide in the club, and they lose that particular essence of it being a club. As long as it is between the members, it is not coming out as a profitable venture, because the club as such is not, again, the objective is not to make profit there. If you look at the charter of the club, it is never to make profit. It is probably to promote, I would not say brotherhood, but again, unity among people, and people coming together for a common cause, social-religious activities, so on and so forth. That's how it's happening. It's across.
Between you and me, maybe Prashant could be a member of Jain Air Club. Where is the common cause? It is exclusive.
Between that members, that's all. They're not, again, it's a subsect that they're creating, saying, are you eligible? Yes, apply. Wait for 25 years, you'll get a membership. Just because there's a waiting list of 25 years, cannot be said that it is arbitrary. They're not saying you must have income of X rupees to become, no. They may have basic structure, basic dress code, etc., which is being fought on a daily basis with different people anyway. So it's a discussion for another day.
Sir, one second. So small instructions for members. So this is actually physical cum virtual mode. So if you speak in mic only, then your question will be reached audience of who are attending virtually. So next time when you are asking any doubts, please speak in mic itself. And virtual mode, we'll take the questions at the end of the session. Yeah, because so around 400 to 500 members are attending virtual mode. So it will be beneficial for them also. Thank you.
So one other related activity to charitable institutions is the running of a hostel along with the college. If the hostel is being run as a separate entity and making profits, it is taxable again. But if it is part of the college and they're collecting hostel fees and the mess fees and food, it will still come under the overall ambit of the education institution itself, because students are coming there to study, you're providing them accommodation, definitely at rates which are not available commercially. Probably a hostel fees a student pays will be much less compared to you taking up a room or lodge or something on rent outside. So therefore, if it's part of a same institution organization, if it's being done as a separate entity and the people are making payments outside of that institution, it's possible that that hostel business will be assessed as such, as a separate business of providing accommodation. How much profit he makes is secondary. The hostel will be treated as a separate entity. But if it's within the same institution and the fees is being collected along with it, then even the hostel fees will come under the overall ambit of the fees collected from students. And as long as infrastructure is being given, it comes into the overall ambit of education there. Textbook committees is one important case. Activity of preparation and distribution of textbooks certainly contributed to process of training and development. Merely because associate generated profits of activity of publishing and distribution, it could not be concluded that it ceased to carry on charity, which means the objective of a particular committee set up as a trust to bring out textbooks for school children. They prepare that as a curriculum with guidance. It's not that today me and Gupta sit down and say this is the book and standard 2 will study. No, there's a board appointed and they will scrutinize the contents and they will allow it to be published as a material for medium of instruction for students. Under those cases, they said it is not activity for profit because there is surplus generated. At the same time, the intention is not to make profit there, and therefore even that was exempt from taxation. Coming to yoga. Though the term yoga was added to the definition of charitable purpose only in 2015, many years ago itself, Bombay High Court said that meditation, yoga, and propagation of philosophy was charitable in nature and object of general public utility. 280 ATR 553 itself, which is much earlier to yoga being brought in. How yoga got into in Finance Act 2015 is on a different reason why it did not come in. Why yoga had to come in there is for a different, I would say, socio-political reasons why yoga was introduced in the definition of charitable. But High Courts had consistently, even that before that, held that it is general public utility, because Delhi Tribunal had said practice of yoga considers charitable being medical relief and imparting of education even prior to amendment. So therefore, yoga was brought in specifically to say that if you are in this yoga, now you distinguish the practice of yoga here. You have these regular gyms conducting yoga sessions. They are commercial establishments. They will be paying income tax on their profits. Whereas you have, say, on Gandhi Sahitya Sangha conducting one yoga, only yoga, collecting subscription charges from members, exempt. Gold's Gym conducting yoga sessions within their Gold's Gym, taxable. That's the distinction you have to make out, because ultimately in both places it is yoga. Sir, you have sanskari genes also, sir. Yoga is started with yoga. Yes. Sir, please use the mic, otherwise they won't hear.
He runs a business in the form of selling desi products. Whether it is within the 20% threshold,
How do we know?
we do not know.
We do not know.
Because he is bidding for Nirma and other consumer durable companies also. So it means if you have to gross it up for 100%, his yoga collections from the seminars he conducts, will that be so big?
I do not have information pertaining to his gross receipts, but as long as, insofar as yoga is concerned, it will be exempt. If it's done under the separate organization, saying if the objective is to, along with say, education relief of the poor, if he's also practicing yoga, it is exempt. Commercially, what he's doing, the business activities, probably will keep it for another day, but I do not have any financial numbers available with me of Mr. Baba Ramdev. So much I'm making it clear.
Sir, my question was, profits or whatever you call it from the commercial enterprise, will that also latch on to the yoga activity and get benefit of exemption?
See, one other way of looking at it is, when you look at exemption under 11(1)(d), so once any voluntary contributions partake the character of income first and you claim exemption under 11(1)(d), there are judgments which have held that if you plowed back the particular so-called profits into the activities which are being charitable, Karnataka High Court in Belli Samsthanam case has allowed that to be exempt and allowed under 11(1)(d). So it depends on the facts of the case as to how it is portrayed, because Karnataka High Court in Belli Samsthanam 336 ITR has said that yes, it may be income from third parties, but ultimately if it is used for the charitable purposes only of constructing, say, the hostel building or a school building, then, for example, joint development agreement by trusts, they would have had huge tracts of land, which probably would have been donated to them many years ago. They enter into JDA, get buildings constructed, let them out, collect the rent. It is property held under the trust, exempt, because yes. Correct. And ultimately that particular surplus is being generated to utilize for charitable purposes, for feeding that 1 crore children, Akshaya Patra Foundation. It is exempt. That is the principle. Once that principle is clear, you can keep adding many items to it. If it is treated as business only, as long as it is property held under the trust, you would not say it is a separate business activity.
Only business
If
activity
it
is
is a business activity is run as a general advancement of general public utility, you carry out a business activity, those receipts should not exceed 20% of the gross receipts. If any money which is coming in is part of the dominant objective of the trust, you will not get into the proviso at all. You are exempt under 2 subsection 15 itself, like the KITB. You will not get into proviso because you are exempt under the section itself. You will not come to the proviso.
So the ceiling applies only for the proviso.
Yes.
Thank you.
Slides are this, sir. The material was published well in advance so that they will read. It is for a discussion.
So Prashant, this discussion whether the business will also enjoy the benefit or not, only if it comes within the 20%. If it crosses the 20%, it will get taxed. Is that right?
Yes, it should get taxed. Yes. Next, we'll come to sports organizations. Promotion of sports is an object of general public utility. The raging controversy, we will not get on. You have Gujarat High Court, you have Rajasthan High Court, you have Bombay Tribunal recently, as recent as 2nd November 2021, they have passed a judgment, BCCI. In effect, in all the cases that we are going to discuss in sports is 99% is cricket only. In other places, there is no surplus being generated in many other sports. So you rarely see a case reaching up to the judicial forums here. The issue has always been whether these associations are entitled to exemption under section 11. We can bifurcate that into 2 aspects, pre-IPL, post-IPL. Pre-IPL, nobody had any real cause of concern because ultimately, how the state associations function is, BCCI, depending on, this is, again, before the Lodha committee also, you had certain way of disbursement to state associations. After Lodha committee, the Lodha committee changed how you have to distribute money. But distribution of money remains a constant. BCCI provides money to all state associations for furtherance of the game of cricket. That is treated as corpus or income of the society, depending on accounting treatment meted out to that particular receipt by different associations. Better way is to bring it to show it in the computation. So what happened? Post IPL, the scenario changed because they started seeing more and more money. Earlier, used to have limited resources of broadcast rights and advertisements, and it used to be sufficient to run cricket over so many states, more so the underdeveloped states in terms of cricket than the Northeast and a lot of other states, which are, or many other smaller states which did not have the required infrastructure. The money was being flowed back. So even BCCI was treated to be charitable in nature because ultimately it is for the promotion of the game of cricket. After the IPL came in, the commercial saga was associated with it because the revenue which was say 1 rupee became 100 rupees suddenly. how do you view that particular thing? Whether the commercialization of the sport, should it be looked at as deviation from the objective itself, or look at the observation of the Bombay Tribunal in the latest judgment, which was delivered on 2nd November 2021, improvising the rules of the game, adding entertainment value to it, and making it economically attractive may be a purist nightmare, but the same factors can also be viewed as a radical and innovative ideas to popularize the game. Which means that is now, if you look at the BCCI's annual report, the money from IPL is being used to promote the game in such a way that it is reaching the farthermost part of the country, and at all stages, under 11, under 13, under 15, under 19, all the age groups, people are being able to promote it with good amount of infrastructure, and also wherever possible good nutrition for them, and supporting with them that sporting gear and other things is happening. It's not the associations are not making money, but ultimately they are not able to, they can't distribute the surplus, and they are supposed to invest the money only in more specified under 11 subsection 5. So ultimately it is remaining as fixed deposits in scheduled banks or in the more specified under 11 subsection 5. It is not permissible for any of these associations to part with that money what they receive, even the gate receipts what they receive, and then the additional merchandising revenue what they receive, and the sponsorship that each separate associations receive from the IPL teams, all of it constitute income for the state association, which is being used to take the game to different parts of the I would say state and country. For example, Karnataka State Cricket Association is coming up with say 2 other grounds in different parts of the state, which earlier did not have that infrastructure. How are they able to do it? One, because of the ticketing receipts from the IPL, which is being held in Bangalore, and also the KPL, which was an offshoot of IPL under a local regime. To again, to get onto the route, they say to spot talent. It's become a talent hunting exercise as well. The moment we leave aside the other socio-political reasons behind the cricket associations and the power tussles behind it, but ultimately at the end of the day, if you have to look at from the conceptually, if you look at it, you can say that the money is being flowed back into the system. So therefore, on that count, they are eligible for exemption under section 11, because the reforms of the Lodha committee have been implemented. People cannot hold multiple posts more than 90. All those things are on administrative side. But insofar as the game of cricket is concerned, it will continue to be exempt for a state association. But it will not be, the distinction we can make is, if I start a coaching center today for cricket, I have to pay. It's a regular commercial venture for me. I'm into coaching. Whereas Karnataka State Cricket Association, when it is into coaching of students, it's a different ball game altogether. This is the Bharat Diamond Bourse, what I was talking about, world-class gems and jewelry park. If the objective was to promote and export of diamonds, it was held as exempt. We discussed this already in the beginning itself. Institutions held to be charitable, bar councils, Chamber of Commerce, with a rider that, as we discussed Karnataka Chamber of Commerce, if you're caught with lots of money and you admitted that you have received capitation fees and other things, registration was denied, but otherwise, the body as such is exempt entity. State Road Transport Corporations, Bureau of Industry. Stock exchanges have a different thing now because changes have taken place into how, by the time this judgment came in, and now it is different ball game. Of course, a race club can never be charitable. You cannot say that the objective is to make the horse run and make money. So therefore, a race club will never get into the realm of it being charitable. See what happens if you have to look into the object behind why a particular thing will not be looked into. If the objective is not to if you to collect money and make profit and do a lot of things, they will say that you're not falling into the realm of the definition of charitable purpose at all. Only if your dominant objective is to satisfy the conditions of relief to the poor, education, yoga, medical relief, so on and so forth, and advancement of general utility will fall under the ambit of 2 subsection 15, eligible for, because for trade unions, you also have 10 subsection 26, wherein you can claim exemption for under 1026 for a trade union. If you're a registered trade union and you follow the certain guidelines, you will have exemption provided separately under the act for that. I think inter-trust corporate donations and these things, I am given to understand that Mr. Suresh covered it in the first session insofar as the pre-amendment and post-amendment, the donations being given to other trusts. One other issue is interest earned on corpus funds. Whether will it partake the character of being exempt under 11(1)(d)? Yes, definitely yes, because the moment you say something is corpus, which means it's with the specific direction of the donor that it ought to be used for a specific purpose only. Then, till you achieve that purpose, the money is parked in instruments under 11 subsection 5. The interest accrued on that would automatically partake the character of being, I would not even say incidental, it's part of the corpus, and therefore the interest from corpus donations, which is earmarked, also would qualify for exemption under 11(1)(d). Donor, yes. 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 Look at the next one. If the intention of the
Donor is important here.
yes, if the intention of the donor to the trust to be utilized for a particular purpose only, it partakes the nature of it being corpus fund, and the trust or the institution has to use it only for that particular purpose and that purpose alone.
Okay, supposing it is silent, the donor is silent.
The donor is silent, the trust will not be in a position to say it is corpus.
So here
It becomes voluntary contribution,
voluntary.
part of the Income and Expenditure Act, and then your application and the 85% criteria will kick in for that.
So the corpus donor has to specify how to use the interest.
For the interest, it need not be a specific direction, because the moment the principal amount qualifies as corpus,
Yes.
the interest amount is incidental to it, because till you achieve your principal objective, the money is parked there.
Okay.
There can be a case wherein the donor can say,
Yeah.
I am donating a sum of 1 crore for the construction of the building. After you acquire the land for the building, I'll give it to you. In the meanwhile, if you earn interest on this 1 crore, you can use it for general purposes. If the intention of the donor is clear, it will become voluntary contributions and part of the income and expenditure account. You can take it. There is no harm. Ultimately, the intention of the donor is coming out in some way, saying that I am wanting the money to be treated as part of the corpus and not part of the general donations. Yes, sir.
Skill development amounts to relief of the poor.
Skill development, maybe relief of the poor, maybe education. It can be both. Because when you say a skill development, you have to look at it from what is that you're trying to impart. Is it, if it is on the nature of, if you're able to classify that as part of the educational activities, and if you have a board, for example, Karnataka State Skill Development Corporation, it's a body. They have taken the registration, they have obtained a PAN. It is again Association of Persons Trust. If it's a body established for not for profit and conducting these activities, the fact that they're in for upliftment of the poor and making them better equipped or to be employable would not make them as commercial. They will be able to take the position as, in fact, they're a charitable institution on different ground itself. They need not say relief to the poor. His charter would say that his intention is not to make profit, but to upliftment of the weaker sections of the society to be brought to a status of being employable or say entrepreneurial spirit among them. Definitely you can take a position that subject to the condition. In TD wherein if you fall here into these categories, on the market value, you will pay the accredited tax equals accredited income into maximum marginal rate. And this is a draconian provision insofar as charitable institutions are concerned. If you deviate from you not being charitable, which is why the judgment of BCCI by the Bombay Tribunal saying that it is charitable is very important, because had they said it is not charitable, imagine BCCI paying tax under 115 TD at maximum rate on their value of the assets. That's the provision. Tata Trust case is a classic case wherein department wanted to use a backdoor entry. What was the reason here? Tata Trust, which came in between Ratan Tata and Palkewala, were the settlers of the trust, started in 76 itself. They got the registration as charitable institution, went on till March 2015. In Finance Act 2015, dividends were supposed to be brought to tax from 1/4/2015. So in 2015 March itself, Tata Trust wrote a letter to the commissioner saying that we do not, our provisions will not be in conformity with the conditions attached to our registration. Therefore, we would not want to claim the benefit of 12A, and you can proceed accordingly. Based on that, the Commissioner of Income Tax Exemptions issues a show cause notice to the trust in 2015 itself, and in the order sheet noting writes that so and so appeared, and they place reliance on the letter that they wanted to surrender the registration, and the case is taken as heard. That word is very important in any judicial proceeding. When they say the matter is heard, the hearing stands concluded. Subsequently, like a diligent assessee, Tata, after 6 months, after 1 year, constantly wrote letters to the department chain to remind them, look, we had wanted to surrender the registration. You had also agreed based on our order sheet, but we have not received any order in writing. And in the returns that they filed after the date of, that is after 20th March 2015, whichever return they filed, they did not claim the exemption of 12A at all. What did the department do? In 2018, because Finance Act 2016 came up with 115 TD. In 2018, the commissioner issues a notice to them saying, show cause why your charitable institution status should not be revoked, which means the moment the registration, if it's cancelled in 2018, the trust which was enjoying exemption from 75 onwards, till then, you are losing 12A registration, because one of the conditions of 115 TD is the trust loses the registration under 12A. Then you end up paying fair market value within 14 days of that particular order. Matter reached the tribunal, wherein the tribunal said the registration taken under 12A of the Act was a beneficial provision which the Tata Trust wanted to take then. A benefit which is conferred on any particular entity cannot be thrust upon it. It is like how the circulars are binding on the department. Assessee has a choice to choose a circular which is beneficial to him only. Or the assessee can choose not to use a beneficial circular also. A benefit cannot be thrust upon you. In this case, tribunal has specifically held that what is a benefit conferred on a particular entity cannot be thrust upon them. they gave the classic examples of Supreme Court observation Mahindra Mills 243 ATR 56, wherein Supreme Court said before the amendment to section 32(2), wherein as per which the depreciation is now made mandatory, before that, assessee had a choice to claim depreciation or not. Supreme Court said yes, assessee has got a choice. That was a Mahindra Mills case in 243 ATR. Subsequently, Act was amended to say whether the assessee claims it or not, department is supposed to give depreciation. Similarly here, it is a 12A was a benefit conferred, and it was before the 1996, before 12AA, it was a 12-year registration. It's a benefit that was conferred upon Tata Trust. And when they have voluntarily chosen to relinquish that particular benefit, department cannot say, I will cancel it from 2018 so as to collect revenue. The moment the intention is made clear on 20th March 2015, as per the facts of the case, because it's a 71 paragraph order which I've read in detail, which is why I'm able to tell the dates of the order. Once the communication was established between the department and assessee on 28th March 2015 that the hearing concluded and they voluntarily gave up the registration and the proceedings were concluded, at most the registration should be cancelled with effect from 20th March 2015 and not or any date prior to that. It is possible for the department to say from 1/4/2014 itself I will cancel, because during that year you embarked upon an activity which is not charitable, I will cancel. But department cannot take the benefit saying I will wait for 2-3 years and then wait for certain provision like this to come in and then issue show cause notice to you, wherein assessee first intimated saying, look, I am not charitable, I want to give up this status. Then after 3 years you issue a show cause notice to me saying show cause why your registration should not be cancelled, whereas the trust voluntarily wanted it to be cancelled. And ultimately they concluded that the registration cancellation should be effective at most from 20th March 2015, and therefore the department will not be permitted to take the invoke 115 TD, say that department revenue's contention was that, like they gave an example of a dissolution of a company, saying that till an order is passed, you cannot dissolve the company. The tribunal has analyzed that to say, in a company, a new entity is being formed or brought into existence, and therefore it requires to be dissolved separately. Whereas here there is no separate entity, it's only a benefit which was conferred upon the assessee, which the assessee is voluntarily relinquishing. Therefore, the tribunal has struck down revenue's argument on that ground also, which they wanted to bring it to tax from using 115 TD. Therefore, as it stands today, revenue can't compel continuation. If any assessee voluntarily wants to opt out of the charitable regime, department cannot say, look, after 2 years only you will be permitted, unless the condition of registration was that you will continue for a particular period and do such of those acts which are permissible, which none of those exists in the Tata Trust case. So therefore, voluntary registration of 12A would not result in accretion of income under 115 TD. What is important is we need not get on to the whether 116. Even today, if any assessee wants to voluntarily give up the registration, department cannot say, I will tax you under 115 TD. Yes. On the screen, is it?
The educational institute registered under 12A, providing education organization by foreign institute, whether this activity exemption is available?
Education is registered 12A, providing education recognized by foreign institution. See, so far there have been no for a trust. They are not saying that the activity must be carried. The objective and the property must be held in India is very clear. But just because they're imparting a course from India for a degree which is recognized outside will not make any difference. As long as the activity is being conducted from here, it would not change the character, because say one foreign university is recognizing your degree. Recognition by foreign university will not change the character of a trust here if the objective is imparting education. The awarding of a degree by foreign institution will not change it.
In case of trust accounting on cash basis and TDS is deducted on actual interest on FD, should incurred
Should
interest-
accrued interest be accounted in accounts? Will in, see, it's definitely the only issue is about method of accounting. Because the Income Tax Act recognizes only two methods of accounting, cash or mercantile. Hybrid accounting is not permissible now. Hybrid is not permissible. Though in the notes to accounts, you can make an exception to say accounting is on cash basis, excepting for bank interest, which is on accrual basis. And then for the TDS, you can claim the credit of TDS in the year in which you offer the income. The choice that they will have is change the accounting policy to say that cash basis of accounting, excepting for bank interest on accrual basis, offer the accrued interest to tax, claim the TDS, or say it's cash basis of accounting, even interest accrued is not being considered here. In the income tax return, say that TDS will be carried forward to the next year, offer the income whenever and claim the credit. I think that's clear. No, that's not the question. 85, if at all for the benefit of all, if 85% is for on the gross receipts, you're supposed to spend 85%. Supreme Court in Community Programming 248 ITR page number 1. It is on gross. Yes, accrued interest will come under the gross.
So what is the difference between NGO and cooperative society? Is NGO and society are come under trust?
Cooperative society, it's a even a cooperative bank is a cooperative society. It's a species of the cooperative society. NGO is only a term using, it's a non-governmental organization. It can partake any form. It can be a Section 8 company, it can be a trust under Section 12, it can be any other thing. There is no statutory recognition to something called non-government. The name itself implies it is non-government organization. That's all. Society, you are either registered under Societies Act and also claim registration under Section 12 here, or directly you have a trust wherein only the Income Tax Commissioner, you file the trust deed with the Income Tax Department and you can continue. Under the Trust Act 1882, you can have a trust registered, or you can have a society registered under Societies Registration Act or the Karnataka Societies Registration Act, whichever suits you. Then apply for registration under 11 and 12 as the case may be. It will not change the character. Eleven subsection 5 is very clear that you can have money in savings bank account, because a deposit in savings bank account is also a deposit as per the banking regulation norms. Deposit need not be construed as a fixed deposit or a time deposit only. Deposit means any amount of money which you park with that particular bank is a deposit with the bank. Post office savings bank or deposit with any scheduled bank is also covered there.
Whether keeping money in savings deposit.
That's answered. Over.
In case the non. So in case non-governmental
They're exempt.
trade.
They're exempt. FICCI, FKCCI, BCIC, Bar Council. In fact, our ITAT Bar Association also we've got the exemption. Because it's to act as a bridge between the bar and the bench.
In principle of
Last question. Finally, last question.
In principle of mutuality, I understand that membership fee and maintenance fee is exempted. If they use the car parking or other spaces and earn income on that, is that an income taxable? It is again plunged back.
Flowed back for the benefit of members.
Flowed back.
As long as the income is incidental to the main activities, it would not change the character of it not being mutuality. Only car parking receipts or say some of the incidental activities would not change the overall nature. It would not really alter the characteristics of mutuality. But that's all. Thank you all.
Wow, it was indeed very value-added session, and everyone enjoyed the session. Thank you so much once again, Prasant sir, for your valuable time. And I request Chairman of Bangalore Branch, BT Sethi sir, to please come forward and present gift voucher for the today's session speaker. Members, now let's break for tea, and we'll resume the session at 4:30.